So welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. And today, Stephen and I are very happy to welcome Dr. Chelsea Wakefield to the podcast. And let's start with a little biographical information on her. She is the founding director of the Couples Center at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, where she supervises clinicians and teaches her transformative system of couples work. She is a psychotherapist, educator, conference facilitator, public speaker, and author. And her books include Labyrinth of Love, The Path to a Soulful Relationship, Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, I like the title of that one, and In Search of Aphrodite, Women, Archetypes, and Sex Therapy. She is also creator, facilitator of the Luminous Women Weekend and host of the podcast Heartside Chats. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Chelsea Wakefield.
Good to be here.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here. So we'd like to begin with a little about you and just helping people to have a little background. Since we focus on spiritual practice here in the Raising Our Vibration podcast, could you tell us a little bit about inner work that has been important to you, any spiritual practices or just any inner work practices that you've found important in your life?
I was one of those people that became interested in spirituality at a very young age. I had a somewhat mystical experience when I was about 13, when I was praying. I was raised in the Christian tradition, and I had a very deep prayer practice, and I had a really profound encounter with the other, the divine, the universal intelligence at a young age, and began to read and explore lots of things. Was introduced. I was unable to meditate when I was younger. I was far too restless. I tried it, again and again, but at some point in time, my capacity to sit with myself, and particularly with my body sensations, settled out and really beginning to become more embodied, which was something that I was not as a younger person. I was very much in either the spiritual or the intellectual, and very little. I had a friend that used to kind of like, hit my shoulder and say, get in that body, because I was like floating out there. But over time, I've just come to understand how very important it is to actually be in the body and how much information the body can give us. So part of my spiritual practice turned around with just really attending, looking in and tracking sensation, and then going more deeply into the sensation and kind of listening to what it was saying to me, wondering where it came from, starting to notice the images that would arise or the memories that would arise. And I began to stretch out beyond the realm of Christianity somewhere when I was about 18 years old. And I remember one of the books I read back then, maybe you remember this, Handbook to Higher Consciousness by Ken Keyes. It was a really old book, but just starting to adopt those kinds of interesting ideas, Course in Miracles. And then much later, I discovered the work of Carl Jung. And being in Jungian analysis really helped me to bridge the psychological and the spiritual. And by that time, I was trained as a psychotherapist and working with people. But what I really realized is that really deep change, not just surface change where people thought differently, but core change happened in moments of deep encounter, and when they had these sort of pivotal axial shifts in the sense of what reality was, and exiting an old story and embracing a wider reality. And as I say to couples so often, most of the problems that you're experiencing are going to be transcended by growth. They're not going to be solved. You're going to grow. You're going to have a wider reality. You're going to let go of some things. And in the process of doing that, your problems are going to start to evaporate.
Beautiful. That reminds me of a quote attributed to Einstein about you can't solve a problem from the same consciousness that created the problem. So
Absolutely.
that's where your growth mindset comes in.
That's right.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And you know what's interesting about the growth mindset is I'm so happy that neuroscience is actually beginning to move closer to consciousness in recognizing that there are really big changes in the brain in terms of how we process things that can actually be pictured. So stuff that we used to refer to, like the concept of transformation or operating from a different state of consciousness, you can literally see different parts of the brain lighting up, which doesn't in any way, to me, it allows people who are a lot more thinking oriented and a lot more scientific oriented to consider that many things that really didn't have any quote unquote legitimacy to them in the past actually are really grounded in big truths.
Exactly. That's something Stephen and I have been very interested in and found as a great bridge with a lot of people is we've done meditation with EEG headsets on and also been into labs so we've done it with the home headsets like the Muse and Flow Time and those kind of devices. But then we went into EEG labs and had them confirmed. And it's fascinating to see the effects of different inner states, different meditative states on consciousness. For example, on the default mode network in the posterior center of the brain, how getting into a deep meditative state really brings alpha waves into that area of the brain and quiets that rumination, that self-focus, that kind of repeated stories that you were talking about. That meditation can be a powerful tool for people, not only to recognize what's going on inside here, but also to start to quiet down those stories so that some new possibilities can come forth.
Wonderful. I hope somebody's publishing about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of research studies being funded now on meditation and EEG, and also on, and you mentioned inner body awareness or sensing sensations in the body. Stephen and I were just talking last week about there has been a call from the NIH for research projects on interoception and the relationship of interoception to mental emotional health. And so that's really where Stephen and I start with in our subtle energy meditation practices, is teaching people to get out of the head and to start, as you described, start to go into the body and become comfortable with accessing all the information and sensory awareness that is available when we learn how to simply tune into the sensations of the body.
That's wonderful. Sometimes it reminds me of something that I do with couples sometimes, where I'm aware that periodically they'll enter into a different state of being with each other. And Peter Levine, he had a term called pendulation. And I'm so excited about the possibilities of, we all have these really amazing inner resources, but when we're activated and upset, we can't always access them. Particularly if they're good thoughts, you know, they have to really be rooted in the body. And so this idea of pendulating, moving back and forth from a resourced state to a distressed state, back to a resourced state and a distressed state, back and forth, which actually begins to build pathways in the brain, which makes it easier for people to move into resourced states when they're activated. That's really exciting stuff. That's on the horizon right now.
Absolutely. And that's where the first principle or first practice Stephen and I teach is interoception. The second is mindfulness. So it's one thing to be able to awaken sensory awareness and tune in here, but then it can be kind of scary, right? If you're not used to that, as all these different thoughts and emotions and sensations come forth. So it's critical to be able to be a curious observer, be kind and gentle and compassionate with ourselves, and to learn that attitude of mindfulness, which is so far from what we get in, our culture, especially, which is the opposite of non-judgmental present moment awareness, right? It's all this judgment and story based and right and wrong. And so we tend to relate to ourselves and to our partners that way, right?
Yes, yes. In my recent book, Labyrinth of Love, I talk a little bit about Kristen Neff's research on compassion. Self-compassion, but she's actually got some really interesting writing on relationships and how people who practice self-compassion are more capable of extending compassion to a partner. And they're also more accountable, because when you have self-compassion, you have less shame. And one of the reasons why partners won't own up to things that they've done that are hurtful or not very conscious when they're relating to their partners is they are overcome by interior feelings of shame, and they don't even want to wade into it. So being able to be kind to ourselves, accept our humanity, the fact that we're imperfect beings, we're all, growing and learning, but we're not perfect, being kind and being mindful, and then being able to communicate. It's something that I regularly try to teach couples, and I know that it has transformed my relationship with my own husband, to be able to come back and say, I don't really like the way I handled that, or I wasn't in my best self, or the way that I said it. And we actually have developed ways of waking each other up when we're not in our better selves, that neither one of us like in the instant it happens, but then we are so invested in trying to relate more consciously. So for example, I like to think of us as having an inner cast of characters. It's something that I write about in Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, and the sub-personalities, these parts of self that we have. And sometimes when I am not in my best self, my husband will say to me something like, is anyone else in there? Which usually makes me really angry when he first says it. But I also recognize that it's a wake-up call. So I'll back up the truck, and then I'll engage in something that I always teach, which is begin within. What is going on with me about this, that I'm reacting in this way? Begin within. Tracking the body sensations, looking at my breath, looking at my, the activation of adrenaline and cortisol in my nervous system, and figuring out what is this really activating in me, and what is my personal work to do around it before I engage in an interpersonal conversation.
Beautiful.
Dr. Wakefield, I'm especially curious about exploring the resource states with you, and about us becoming more consciously awake, just as you described with your husband, because I know that in the Labyrinth of Love, you speak about the 6 love capacities as ways that we can access those inner resources. So I'm just wondering if you could lead us a little bit into how to develop insight and access to those kinds of resource capacities, which you call love capacities, because I think they're such a beautiful entry point for many couples looking to find exactly what you're talking to, resources and also conscious awakening.
So the first step would be to introduce to the concept that relationships can be a path of growth, that they're not about need meeting, even though in good relationships, we do get lots of needs met. And I think it's completely okay to talk about one's needs, one's wants, one's preferences and desires. I think that's perfectly okay as information, but not as demand. And in a relationship where there's a lot of spaciousness and a lot of compassion and curiosity and interest in growth, when I hear something about something that my husband wants or needs, I can consider it with less personal reactivity, because it's not about me, it's about him. But it's not in a dismissive way, where sometimes I hear people say, well, this is your problem, which is very dismissive and not compassionate and not relational. But I want to consider, because also I consider the relationship to be a third entity. It is something that we co-create together, and we live within the field of that relationship. And we want the field of that relationship to feel good and to be a place where, for instance, when we come home, the home becomes a harbor into which we can sail, where it feels safe and nourishing, where we can replenish to go back out into the world and do our important work in the world. So that sense of of safety, of harbor, of replenishment has to be developed between a couple. It's not something that you necessarily come into the relationship with. So being introduced to the path of growth. And so the first love capacity is commitment. Now, when most people think about commitment, they think about commitment to a person. But I have three dimensions of that. There's a commitment to a person, but more importantly, there's a commitment to a process, to the process of becoming a couple, of learning about each other, of continuing to develop and navigate all the different passages of growth and change over time. And then the third is the commitment to presence. And presence means I'm being present to myself, what's going on with me, really tuning into it and being self-aware, which is, in the scope of a lot of different spiritual practices, and then being present to my husband or to a friend or to anyone that I'm trying to be with, to actually cross the bridge and practice perspective taking. And I think perspective taking is something that very few people understand. And it's such a powerful experience to consider that the three of us are having a conversation right now, but we're having three different experiences. Each of us is taking in what's happening through our history and our filters and the places that we light up and the places we react to and the places we wonder about. Three totally different experiences. And once that we grasp that in any relationship that we're in, it keeps us from taking things personally or being so offended as we're likely to become sometimes. So that's the second love capacity, is actually courage is the second, having the courage to stay the course, face oneself, do the personal work, really, get accustomed to all those intense feelings inside, and then move to curiosity, where I can wonder if, and it's so interesting about curiosity. I've been married for 32 years, and I will definitely say that we've been in about 4 or 5 different marriages over the course of that time, each one redefined and redefined and redefined. And just last year, I learned something about my husband that I thought I understood completely. And it was so amazing to really get what it meant for him over there by not projecting what I thought, but really listening deeply listening, and really thinking about the stories that he told about his upbringing and previous experiences and how he filtered everything. So this curiosity, which is, again, part of compassion, which is another one of the love capacities, of being compassionate with ourselves and being compassionate with our partners. And then communication. There's so much about communication. It's in good communication, we're taught often to speak in I language, which is important. I often hear people say things like, I think you're an idiot, which is not really speaking in I language. It's, I will invite them to say, well, so what is the impact on you when you experience your partner as being an idiot? What's going on inside you? Which to say so often, let's begin within with our own self-awareness and our own personal work before we start calling someone else an idiot. So the notion of being responsible, another thing that people do in communication, I hear so often, well, aren't you supposed to express your feelings? Well, yes, you're supposed to express your feelings, but your feelings and doing so is not really about discharging all your negative affect on the other person. It's really about doing your own personal processing first, so that you know what your feelings are really about, that you deliver them with a sense of respect for the other person's existence, not clobbering them, and to ask for what you want, rather than go into a big litany of complaint about how they've failed you and how they're doing all these horrible things. So just, reel it in, do your inner work, get calmed down, organize your thoughts, figure out what you want, and then communicate and ask, and don't demand. Because again, in intimate relationships, the minute we move into demand, we're always in trouble. So, to deliver a lot of information about, this is who I am over here, this is what's going on with me, or this is what I'm struggling with. And then being open to hearing how that information impacts the other, and going back and forth, not getting stuck in one form of solving things, and really allowing conversations to be, to go on in multiple frameworks. You don't have to solve everything in one conversation. You can kind of come to a place where you need to digest where you are and then pause and then come back later. And particularly in areas where couples have a great deal of difference, because there is no couple that doesn't have difference. And some of those differences are not discovered until we get further into the relationship. So there's commitment, courage, curiosity, communication, compassion. And then the biggest one is the one that we draw from the deep self, and that's creativity. And when we have moved through all of these, and they're not necessarily that you begin with one and move through them, but they're all interactive. But when we are doing our personal work and we're encountering the other and trying to see them as they are rather than as we would wish them to be, and then saying, what are the raw materials that we have, the two of us, to build something, a relationship we both want to be in, you know, the life we want to live together, the kinds of things we want to do, our sexual relationship, how do we co-create that to be something that we both want to participate in? How do we, if we decide to have children, how do we want to raise those children? What is the purpose of having children? What is the big story that we're in? Not the little story of we're going to get married and buy a house and have 2 kids and, you know, take vacations. It's a wonderful story, but people outgrow that story and they have to live into a bigger story.
Nice. What really, well, a number of things struck me there, but one is the importance of understanding perspective, because, and culturally, I think this is something we are missing, is if you look at how we're interacting with each other culturally, we do not understand that we're coming from a point of view. Everything is either right or wrong versus just this is how reality is filtered here in this moment too. I may have, you know, you talked about different selves. Why I may have many different types of moments, many different types of perspectives within myself, much less all the perspectives that are around me. And just understanding that, understanding how we come to have the points of view and experiences we have in the moment is a powerful part of inner work that I think sets up this whole process of growth.
Yes. And what you said about the fact that we can have a completely different experience this moment, 5 minutes from now, next year, because a different understanding, personal understanding in it, or set of inner selves is really looking through a different lens and having a different interpretation.
Beautiful. So can you tell us a little about any specific types of practices that you suggest for couples?
There's the process of perspective taking is something that I find is difficult for people to learn without someone facilitating and pointing out that you're still in your world. You know, the Heidi Schleifer has this wonderful TED talk called Crossing the Bridge, and I love the metaphor of really, you know, leaving your perspective, crossing the bridge into the other person's world with nothing but a little passport. Don't bring your baggage. Just cross the bridge into the other person's world, look out of their eyes, understanding their history. And everything that we react to has roots. And sometimes when people are having an irrational or completely crazy reaction, we think, what is the big deal here? That's a wonderful opportunity to get into a learning conversation and learn a little bit more about why that person's reacting so significantly to something. When we can facilitate curiosity and learning conversations with a partner, when we learn how to do that, and nothing that they're saying is requiring us to do anything other than to get it, to hear it, perhaps to try to reflect it back to make sure that we really understand what they're trying to get across. But asking powerful questions that are not with an agenda is a practice that couples can do. These are not lawyer questions like, why did you do that? You know, who do you think you are? That, you know, they're not lawyer questions. You're not backing anyone to a corner. You're really seeking to understand. I think tell me more is a really good lead in to a learning conversation. And tell me more about, you were just talking about such and such. Tell me more about that. And in the tell me more conversation, the person who is communicating will learn things about themselves. It's actually one of the aspects of good psychotherapy when therapists ask clients to tell me more about that. And then the person goes a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, and they start to discover more and more about themselves. A more meditative practice that couples can do, you could actually sit across from each other, and you could imagine, as you're gazing at each other, that you are actually sending from your heart space love out to the partner and just bathing them in love from your heart space. And just do this for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as you can tolerate. But just really, the two of you are just extending from your heart space love towards the other, unconditional. And if you can't get to love, compassion. Just a sense that you are a human being just trying to get through life just like I am, and I'm going to extend some compassion towards you. Maybe even though I don't understand you, maybe even though you may have hurt me, maybe I don't even like you in this moment, but I'm going to extend compassion. So that's a practice that we can do. Another practice I really like with couples is to synchronize breathing. And this is something that I've really enjoyed doing over the years with my husband in settling into sleep, where we will put our arms around each other and we'll align our solar plexuses, that area of the body, and then just to slowly synchronize our breathing so that we're breathing together and to feel each other, the field of there you are, here I am. We're settling into sleep together. So we're actually co-regulating, we're down-regulating, we're synchronizing, we're just being with each other. And I find that that can be a really amazing way for a couple who loves each other to go to sleep, or a couple who's had a difficult day or maybe a difficult interaction. And that one of the tricks to that is that the faster breather, the slower breather has to align with the faster breather first. And then you slowly slow your breathing. So, you know, that is another practice that you can do with your partner. I think gratitude is incredibly powerful. It's so easy to think about the things that we don't have and the needs that are not getting met. You can get stuck in a story of how this deficient person is not who you wanted them to be, not who you expected them to be, how they're a big disappointment. And you miss all of the potential gifts that they have to offer you. And what's unfortunate about that is, as we negate the gifts that someone is trying to offer us, that person starts to shut them down. And so there's less and less going back and forth between the two people of the raw materials out of which they could co-create a wonderful relationship.
Beautiful. I love those 4 practices. So perspective taking and tell me more. Great question. And then sitting, gazing at each other and having that heart connection, the holding each other and synchronizing breathing. Yeah, that's beautiful. And then gratitude. Yeah.
Yep.
Saying thank you, right? That's one thing my wife and I have really learned to do over the years, is just thank each other for what each other does for our family, for each other.
Even small things. Thanks for, carrying that stuff out to the car for me.
Exactly.
Wonderful meal. Thanks for making the bed. My husband had a stint when he was growing up in military school, and he's a wonderful bed maker. So I have not had to make a bed for 32 years. It's great.
We each have our strengths, right?
We do. Yeah. There's also, in terms of gratitude, what's interesting, because I'm partially a researcher, and if you look at the literature, the research on all the different kinds of couples therapy, and there's a whole portfolio of them. Gratitude, the expression of gratitude, is one of the common factors amongst all those couple therapies, that when people start to express gratitude to each other, their relationship improves.
It just softens everything.
It does.
Dr. Wakefield, I'm curious, just tapping into that and those beautiful techniques that you've guided people to look toward. I have a lot of clients that come to me looking for soulmates and looking for the enchantment of the soulmate, but equally finding they get disenfranchised or disenchanted by that same process. And I'm just wondering, you know, in the same light, when you've got couples or individuals that come to you looking for that soulmate, and sometimes they find themselves falling quite rapidly into disenchantment with yet another partner, and then often cases being very attached to, say, someone that doesn't reciprocate. What sort of advice would you give to souls out there who are not in couple therapy but are actually looking to do that? How would you help them ground and create a good solid foundation for creating that success in relationship?
This idea that soulmates can be found, I think, is one of the most harmful ideas that's circulating through the culture right now. I think we become soulmates. We work together to create a soulful relationship. And out of that, when we encounter the other person, and they encounter us, and we actually are honoring of the mutual journey that we're on, that's a soulful relationship. And I don't believe in soulmates. I think that there are people who seem to be very compatible. I also am very much in alignment with Carl Jung's idea that there is an unconscious stream, and sometimes that click that we feel with someone where we feel, oh my goodness, you're my soulmate, you're the person I've always longed for, has more to do with really deeply embedded scripts and unmet needs and familiarities, where that person may remind us of something that we experienced when we were younger, or maybe they remind us of the opposite of what we experienced, and we think, oh, you're giving me the love and attention I always longed for, you're my soulmate. And then we get into relationship with them, we move in with them, we marry them, and then all of a sudden we discover that they have different ideas about saving and spending, or they they're grouchy in the morning, or the way they discipline the children is completely abhorrent to us, one direction or another. So, these kinds of differences are part of the grist of becoming a couple. And I would tell people that are looking for a soulmate that the number one thing they want to look for is a person who is oriented around growth. If you can get together with someone who wants to grow in consciousness and as a person, to really deal with the baggage that we all bring into relationship and to transcend that, and to grow with you, and is not, projecting onto you that you're going to be the ideal soulmate, where you fall off the pedestal and they fall off the pedestal, and now we're arguing and we break up and we go in search of another soulmate, rinse and repeat. And, so find someone who is interested in a process of growth, and don't make it your definition of growth. Not like you have to grow in this way. If you're not meditating as much as if you haven't become a vegan, if there's all sorts of boxes that people need to check in life right now. And it leaves very little space for encountering another person as they actually are.
Beautiful.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
I think that really relates to meditation practice too, as we're always supporting people to understand that whatever arises here, just allow it to be as it is. Just allow it to be as it is. Accept it. Open up to it. And the same with another person. As we allow that in ourselves, then it's much easier to allow that in another.
Yes.
And that opens up a different level of communication and relationship.
And what's so interesting about that is in terms of like allowing things to arise, and rather than resisting them or tangling with them or thinking I should be different, just allowing them to sort of arise and pass through to be in curiosity, to be in observance, like, wow, I'm really anxious in this moment. Oh my goodness, I feel an extreme amount of anger. I wonder what's going on with me. Or I'm very afraid. Whatever that is, and just allowing it to arise and being in that place of curiosity, both in ourselves and, again, if our partner has a big reaction to something or a big resistance, to wonder, wow, I wonder what that is. Tell me more about that. And what people get so afraid of where things are going, and they attach meaning to things. And if we can get at the meaning that they're attaching, or where they're afraid that things are going, so much can get solved.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I totally agree. That whole questioning process about perspective is one of the foundations of all the practices that I love doing with people, helping people to stay present, to be open, and then to explore the perspective of another person. With that, tell me more. That sense of openness and curiosity, I think that is really the beautiful magic of true relating and relationships. So thank you so much for your wisdom on that, because I think that's it's like it's an intersection point for everything that Kevin and I are doing as well. It's really very beautiful.
Yeah. And you were asking me earlier about my own practices. I usually have a morning practice. If I was more spiritual, I'd probably have an evening practice. I say that kind of wryly. But my morning practice really has to do with tuning into myself, getting quiet, listening and observing to what is arising in this day. From the night, sometimes I have some dreams that I've had that I want to take a look at, like, what is this? How is the psyche speaking to me in terms of, is it trying to balance something that I'm out of balance? Is it bringing some new energy to me? Dream work is one of my spiritual practices. I don't do dream work every morning, but it is one of the things that I do. So to get quiet, to listen, to breathe, to observe, and then to set my intention for the day is part of what I like to do. Who do I want to be as I'm moving through this day? What is my archetypal stance that I want to be in as I'm moving through this day, depending on what I'm doing? Am I spending time with family? Am I going to be seeing clients and couples? Am I teaching? Am I cleaning the house? What's the stance that I want to be in as I'm moving through the day? And then checking in with myself, weaving a checking in practice throughout the day to make sure that the level of my bodily activation has not gotten to a place where I go into this kind of unconscious spin out mode where I become more mechanized or fall into old stories. So I do a lot of checking in with my body to making sure that the sense of being grounded and in a place where, I feel like I'm in a space where I can actually generate a field when people come in to work with me. Can I generate some sort of a spacious field in which I'm holding a space of possibility, which on some energetic level may invite them to open to a space of possibility beyond where they came in, beyond the constriction of where they came in. And I think a lot of that has to do with the place and the space, my own clarity, my own personal work of really being able to generate that spacious, transformative field in which people can consider things and relax a little bit and get that box a little bit loosened.
Beautiful. I think Stephen and I have an affinity with everything you said there.
Absolutely.
Kevin,
sorry, go. Please.
Kevin, you and I, before we started recording, we were talking about Carl Rogers, who was, many people have not heard of him, but he was a really amazing psychotherapist back in the 1960s and such. And that is essentially what Carl Rogers was doing with people. He was generating this spacious, transformative field, which he often termed unconditional positive regard. But into that field, people would enter and they would relax and they would be more open to discovering things about themselves and making shifts in that non-judgmental space that they wouldn't be able to make a shift in with their, their parents growing up, or out in the world where, as you said, we've got so much right and wrong and judgment and focus on efficiency rather than all the intangibles that have so much value in this life.
Yeah, beautiful. And that if we can bring a little of that to all our relationships each day, what a powerful difference that would make.
Yes.
I think that's a wonderful place to draw to a close. Is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think that if we consider that, to the extent that we can begin with ourselves and then extend out to our intimate relationships, and then even to interact with the person in the checkout stand at the grocery store, to actually sort of say hello and make some eye contact and treat them as if they exist. Just really expanding the circle of touching people's lives with presence and really treating them as if they have value in their own right, to the best of our ability, that this practice can ripple out into our world so that our individual work has circles of influence far beyond that which we really can ever know.
Beautiful. Yes, so well said. And if people would like to know more about your work or contact you, where is a good place to do that?
I have a website, chelseawakefield.com, and I've got one program on there right now called Love Strategies for Stronger Relationships that they can engage with. I do periodically offer the Luminous Woman Weekend, which is really about women's journey of individuation. I have a very, very full practice right now, but I do work with people. I have a waiting list. So if you wanted to work with me, you could get on that waiting list. I have books, 3 books that you can read, and particularly The Labyrinth of Love. The feedback that I've gotten about that book has been very gratifying in terms of how it has light bulbs coming on and improved relationships. So that's how they can get in touch with me.
Wonderful.
And then my podcast, Heartside Chats. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to come on your podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Wakefield. And Stephen, anything you'd like to say to close?
Oh, just simply that I think you've spoken straight to the capacities we have for love, and that it really reaches out to every single person, that we can do that for ourselves and for each other. And I think bringing that presence to that ripple effect that you're speaking about, and sharing that with every single person, the people in the supermarket, the people walking down the street, there's something magnificent that happens as you open to that sense of spaciousness, and that everybody is included in that. So I love the all-inclusiveness of all that you've shared with us, and the beauty of your presence and the clarity of your sharing. I'm really deeply grateful for everything that you've brought for us and for our listeners. Thank you. It's a great honor to have you on.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dr. Wakefield, and thank you all for watching and listening. So with that, we will just invite you to learn more about Dr. Wakefield's work on, say again your website address for everybody.
It's Chelsea Wakefield, spelled CHELSEA, wakefield.com.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you all. Bye for now.